Okay, think about this for a second. For 30 straight years, every American president who sat in the Oval Office stared down the exact same terrifying question about Iran. And for 30 years, every single one of them, they all came to the very same conclusion. Clinton? He said no. Bush? Said no. Obama? No. And Biden? He said no too. You had 4 consecutive presidents from both political parties who all looked at the same intelligence, weighed the same incredible risks, and refused to pull the trigger. It was a 30-year pattern of restraint that held the line.
But, patterns are made to be broken. And after 3 whole decades of a consistent policy, history finally found the first president who was willing to say yes. And just like that, in 2026, that long-held policy was shattered. The entire calculation that had guided the White House for a generation was completely overturned. And the Middle East was changed, literally overnight. So how did this happen? What was it that finally broke the pattern? The U.S. and Israeli strikes were incredibly swift and precise. They went right for the heart of the regime's power. We're talking nuclear infrastructure, missile facilities, and even the compounds where senior leadership lived and worked. This was not some kind of a warning shot. No way. This was a clear attempt to dismantle their capabilities entirely. So this brings us right to the central mystery of this whole story. If the risks were always known, if they were always seen as way too high by 4 different presidents, what on earth changed to suddenly make them acceptable? You see, to really get the shift, you have to understand the original fear. For Clinton, for Bush, for Obama, and for Biden, the big deterrent wasn't whether a military strike would succeed. They were pretty confident it would. The real terror, the thing that kept them up at night, was the day after. The unpredictable, the uncontrollable, the catastrophic consequences that they knew would follow. So, what was the tipping point? Well, it wasn't just one single thing, but more like a sequence of triggers. First, diplomacy just completely collapsed, leaving no peaceful way out on the table. Second, the fears of an imminent nuclear breakout went from a what-if scenario to a right-now emergency. Third, the pressure from key allies, countries who felt their very existence was on the line. It became immense. And all of this, it led to the final step. The entire strategic calculus inside the White House, it just flipped. And this shift in thinking, it was absolutely monumental. The White House had reached a stunning conclusion. The cost of inaction was now believed to be greater than the cost of action. The fear of waiting had finally, officially eclipsed the fear of war. And with that decision, the day after arrived. The very nightmare scenario that every previous administration had worked so hard to avoid was no longer a simulation on a whiteboard in the Pentagon. It was happening. It was unfolding in real time. That fear, that powerful warning that had been a hard stop for 30 years, wasn't a warning anymore. It was the reality that everyone was now forced to live in. And the fallout was exactly what had been predicted for decades. You had retaliatory strikes hitting Israel and key Gulf states. The critical Strait of Hormuz, that choke point for the world's oil, was immediately disrupted. U.S. troops and bases all over the region became vulnerable targets, and global markets, well, they just plunged into a state of panic. And one of the most immediate impacts was felt by everyone, across the globe. Oil prices surged within just 24 hours of the strike, sending a massive shockwave through the markets. This was no longer just some regional conflict. It had triggered a global economic crisis. So, as we wrap this up, it is really worth reflecting on the immense weight of this decision. This wasn't about being right or wrong. It was about choosing between 2 terrifying paths. It was the ultimate presidential dilemma. For 30 years, the fear of action, the known, devastating consequences of war, that's what stopped 4 presidents. But then, the fear of waiting, the fear of an unknown, catastrophic tipping point, that's what finally drove one president to act. It's such a stark comparison, isn't it? 3 decades of restraint and one single, history-altering decision. This really highlights the fragile nature of a long-standing policy, doesn't it? Decades of caution can be undone in a single moment. It only took one yes to completely redraw the strategic map of the Middle East. For a generation, American presidents were defined by their fear of what action might bring. But in the long game of history, it may only be the one leader who feared what would happen if they did nothing at all that is ultimately remembered.